Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So you may have noticed that I didn't have a video last week, and that was because I was ill. I ended up having COVID and it completely knocked me out. I would also say that I am not 100% recovered either. So I decided that I'm still going to do a video, but it's going to be more of a sit down chit chat video instead. And hopefully after that, maybe, after a few days, I would have recovered. But in today's video, I actually wanted to talk about overdrafts. And the reason why I wanted to talk about overdrafts is because I personally have experience using an overdraft. If you didn't know, I actually had a maxed out overdraft of about 2,000. But what I'm realizing is that especially as things are getting much more expensive and inflation is still here, it is still here, I think more and more people are using their overdrafts. And so I want to talk about what to do if you have an overdraft, and if you do want to start paying off the overdraft, you don't want it anymore, what are some of the things that you should be doing? I'm going to be covering that in this video. So let's have a chat and talk about all things overdrafts. Now, I have done videos where I talk about my debt story, and I specifically mentioned that I had my overdraft and I also had a car loan as well. But I really want to talk about overdrafts because I realized that I actually had my overdraft for years. I first used my overdraft whilst I was at university, and then I actually kept it all throughout my postgraduate university life, and then I still had my overdraft whilst I was working in my first graduate job. So me and overdrafts, we've been through a lot. And so one of the key learnings that I would take is if you are someone who is constantly using your overdraft and you really want to pay it off, you want to be able to understand the details behind the overdraft. And when I'm talking about details behind the overdraft, first of all, you want to understand, okay, how much is the overdraft? Because if you don't know how much the overdraft is, then you won't be able to actually create a plan to be able to pay it off. So you want to know, how much is my overdraft? Is it 500? Is it 1,000? Is it 2,000? Is it 3,000? You want to know what number you're going to be working with. And then you also want to know other details, like for example, is it interest free, or are they actually charging you for using that overdraft? Maybe you're using an unarranged overdraft. Again, you want to know the details behind this, because this will then have an impact on how you actually pay it off. So if I take myself as an example, when I realized that I need to start paying off my debts off, I actually didn't initially start focusing on my overdraft. And the reason why I didn't focus on my overdraft first was because my overdraft was actually interest free for a while, because it had been a student overdraft and they basically give you some time to be able to pay it off before they start, charging interest. And so for me, because I had other debts, so I had a car loan and I was paying over 11% interest on that car loan, it made sense for me to actually focus on paying off that car loan first, so that once I then paid it off, I could then focus on the overdraft, making sure that I pay this off before the interest-free term ran out. And so when it comes to your overdraft, you just want to have a quick look and make sure you understand the details behind it. This shouldn't really take long either, especially if you have an online bank. They will probably give you the details. So it really should only take a couple of minutes for you to understand, okay, how much is the overdraft, and other details like, are you paying interest on it, or is it interest free? So my next learning when it comes to overdrafts is, when you figured out, the details behind the overdraft, and that's more of like the numbers section, you also want to understand the causes of the overdraft. So this actually goes beyond numbers. And when I'm talking about the causes of the overdraft, I want you to actually think about, okay, well, why am I having to use the overdraft? What actually happened that caused me to use the overdraft in the first place? And I say this because when you figure out what caused you to be in the overdraft, you will then have a specific solution for that. So what I mean is, some people may end up going into their overdraft because their expenses are just really high. So especially during this time where rent has absolutely skyrocketed, mortgages, especially if you're in the the UK has absolutely skyrocketed. So because of that, you may find that you have really, really high expenses, and these may be like your core bills that are really high, which may be causing you to have to use your overdraft. That is a very different situation compared to someone who maybe doesn't have sky high bills. Maybe you're actually living with your parents, for example, but you still find you have an overdraft. What you might find is that the reason behind your overdraft isn't actually anything to do with your bills or your core expenses. It could be to do with something else when it comes to your spending. And so how you deal with those two problems would be very different. So as an example, I've had a couple of clients where they've ended up having to use their overdraft, but their bills aren't actually that high. So they live at home, so they don't necessarily need to pay rent, but they end up going into their overdraft and they're kind of just confused as to why they're having to use their overdraft. And partly one of the reasons has been because they have been impulse buying a lot, and so they don't realize that they end up spending more than they actually make, and hence they end up having to use the overdraft. And so how I would then deal with that problem is very different compared to someone who has a lot of bills, whose bills are really high, and that's the reason why they are going into the overdraft. If I'm looking at the impulse spending problem, I'm not necessarily going to be telling them to completely change their bills, but what I might be doing is just getting them to understand their spending a bit more, and then we would then create solutions to help them still spend money, but at the point where they don't end up impulse spending so much, and so they end up having money to now start overpaying on the overdraft. That would be very different compared to someone who maybe has a really high mortgage payment or has a really high rent payment, and so because most of that money is going towards their bills, they then don't really have a lot of money left over, and so they're having to use their overdraft. With someone who is in that situation, what I would probably be doing is looking at their income, checking if their income is enough, or I may also be looking at their expenses as well to see if there's any way that they can reduce those expenses so that they actually have money and don't end up having to use their overdraft. But can you see how actually depending on the causes of what happened with the overdraft will then depend on different solutions? And of course, you know, if you were able to like change your income, increase your income, you would definitely be able to pay off the overdraft quickly in both scenarios. But I still think it's really important to understand the causes, because increasing your income, for example, is going to be much more important if you have really high expenses compared to someone who is in their overdraft because they've been impulse spending. And obviously this is something that I definitely help my clients with, so if you want to learn more about one-on-one coaching, I will leave a link in the description below for you. But when you understand the causes of your overdraft, this will help you to figure out what solution you'll need and what you might need to prioritize. So the third learning that I have when it comes to your overdraft and trying to pay off your overdraft is that you want to focus on both saving and paying off the overdraft. Now, I recently had someone who DM'd me and they had a really interesting question where they said, "Oh, Veronia, I don't want to pay off my debts because it means that I'm not going to be able to have money to save." And so in particular, she's thinking that she shouldn't really be focusing on paying off her debts. For example, you shouldn't focus on paying off your overdraft because you need to be able to save money. And my response to that is, what if clearing your debt is a form of saving? What if paying off your overdraft is a form of saving? And I say this because if you have the ability to take money and keep that money and pull it somewhere else, that is actually a form of saving. And so for me, my thing isn't you need to be doing one or the other. My thing is that actually you are better off doing both. So you are better off, yes, having some savings, but you are also better off paying off that debt. What might be different is the timing and how you actually do it. So one of the things that I did, which I was so thankful for, was that I decided to first learn how to save money. So I had never saved money before. It was something that I always struggled with, but I realized realized that in order for me to actually pay off my overdraft, I need to learn how to save. I need to learn how to take money out of my paycheck and keep those savings. So what I did is I told myself, okay, I'm gonna save an initial 500, and that 500 is gonna be used as a savings cushion. And so what that meant was when I saved that 500, in my mind, I was telling myself, I have that 500 because in case anything happens, like something happens with my job or something happens with my car, I want to make sure that I at least have some cash, because what I don't want to do is start paying off all of this debt and then something happens and I have to then use that debt again. So I have to go back into debt. I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to make sure me paying off my debt was just separate, and if anything happens, I was still covered. So what I did is I initially saved 500 and had that as my savings cushion. But I didn't stop there. I didn't just start saving and then leave my debt alone, because again, with some of my debts, first of all, I was paying interest, so that was costing me more money. But also for me, I realized that if I paid off debt, then I would have more money to save. I'm going to repeat myself. I realized that if I had paid off my debt, then I would have more money to save. And so that's what I did. Once I had that initial 500, I decided, okay, I've got my savings cushion. Now is the time for me to focus on my debt. And of course, I focused on my car loan first because that interest was high, like it was high. But then after that, I then focused on paying off my overdraft. But I still used the same skill. I still saved money, but instead of putting that money into my savings account, I simply put it towards my debt instead. And so don't get me wrong, having savings is really important. I talk about saving a lot on my channel because I think it's one of the best things that you can do. But I think people disconnect the idea of being able to pay off debt versus saving. The actions are actually the same, but what you want to do is, yes, have a savings cushion, because again, that means that if an emergency comes up, you're okay. You don't have to go back into debt. But when you now build those savings, it means that you can also use that same action to pay off your debt. And it's kind of like when, you know, people at work are talking about having transferable skills. So if, for example, I don't know, maybe you're really good at presenting or you're really good at communication, you can of course use that in other jobs. You don't have to specifically use that in that one job. Saving is just like that, because what you'll be doing is using saving as a transferable skill. You will then take the concept of saving and put that towards your debt so that you can be able to pay off your overdraft really quickly. And then after that, you can literally save as much money as possible. So don't think that when it comes to paying off your overdraft versus saving, these are two completely different things and you need to do one or the other. No, you will end up doing both. It just depends on the timing and what you focus on first. And I will also say that you don't need to be a natural saver when it comes to saving. For me, it was something that I had to learn because I don't naturally save. It's just not something that I've been used to. I'm used to spending my money. And so it is something that you can continuously learn, so that once you actually learn how to save, you can then use that to also overpay on your debt really quickly. Now, if you are someone who has decided that you absolutely want to have this overdraft paid off, but maybe you need a bit more help, maybe you need a bit more support to get started, this is exactly what I can help you do in one-on-one coaching. I've been able to help so many clients have more savings than they've ever had, so that they can then use those savings to pay off their overdraft and then also build their savings as well. So if you are interested, all you need to do is book a sales call just to find out more about working with me. So I'll link more information up here for you and in the description below. But I hope that was helpful, and I really hope you didn't hear my stuffy nose throughout this video as well. And if you did like this video, then please do give me a thumbs up if you haven't already. And if you would like to learn more content, I have so many videos on here. You can also subscribe to my channel too. And I will see you next week.